Welcome back to the Brewer Fanatic podcast. We are your hosts, Jack Stern and Spencer Michaelis, coming to you every week to recap all things Brewers for Brewer Fanatic. Spencer, how you doing this week?
I'm doing well. Sure some Brewer fans aren't in the highest, brightest moods after that Phillies series, but I'm feeling pretty good. Had an enjoyable week overall. Yeah, it's been good for a while, honestly. Now that I'm not as busy with coaching, I have a little bit more time to just relax, which is nice. How you doing, Jack?
Sore. I think I slept funny last night because I woke up and everything was just really stiff. It felt like something was like kind of pinched like in my back here, like kind of on my shoulder. What is that, like your lat area? Like back here?
Well, yeah, it can be. I can't
Okay.
really tell where you're pointing, but yeah, it
I
could
mean,
be in
yeah,
that area.
anyone who's only listening to the audio won't be able to tell either. Loosened up a little bit throughout the day as I got moving around a little bit more, ran some errands. But yeah, not the greatest week for our Milwaukee Brewers since our last recording. They went 3-3, but kind of a lot of highs and a lot of lows. I think if you look at this week on the whole, they just really didn't play great baseball overall for about a stretch of 5 games running here now. But I guess we can dive into this pretty quickly. So, the upside of the week was the Brewers sweeping the White Sox at home to wrap up a 7-game homestand. And I was actually a little bit surprised they pulled this one out because they were facing some fairly tough pitching matchups. Those first 2 games, you had Eric Fetty and Garrett Crochet. And to be fair, both of those guys did fare pretty well against the Brewers. But thankfully, the White Sox and their bullpen, especially really the bullpen of the defense, that might be one of the worst run prevention units I have seen in a good long while. So the Brewers were able to take advantage of that. So we're going to dive right into all the action here. Starting with game one, that was a Brewers 12, White Sox 5 game. Tobias Myers getting the start in this one. He went 4 1/3, 7 hits, 5 earned runs allowed, a walk, and 4 strikeouts. Just not a great day for him, and he would end up being optioned to AAA after this game, but he would come back during the Phillies series as part of some injury shuffling that we'll get to in a little bit here. But really, the theme for Tobias in this one, he had the 4 strikeouts. He was getting into a lot of favorable counts, but even with those 4 strikeouts, he was also giving up some damage on 2 strikes counts, just really catching way too much of the plate. He gave up 3 hits on 2 strike counts in this game, and 2 of those were to Paul DeJong. First, a home run, and then a double. So I think this is just a classic example of the stuff is big league ready for Myers, but the command just is not. And this, in my opinion, was one of his worst games command wise that we've seen so far this year. Not necessarily control wise. It was only the one walk for him. The start against the Cubs in Chicago was the one where he just couldn't find the strike zone early on. He was in the strike zone in this game, but just not hitting spots and throwing just too many pitches over the plate after he was getting ahead to guys, and that prevented him from putting more guys away. So I don't know if there was anything that you saw maybe to add on to that, Spencer, or if you just kind of felt the same way, just not great command for him.
Yeah, I was definitely very similar to what you're saying there. I think I even tweeted at some point, like almost exactly what you said, which was he clearly has MLB ready stuff right now, but the command is not where it needs to be. And you just cannot be making as many mistakes in 0-2, 1-2 counts as he was in this game. And I'm actually somewhat shocked to see that it was only 3 hits. It felt like he gave up almost all of his hits when he got into 2 strike counts. But I think he also had some hard hit outs in those spots too. So there was some pretty loud contact against him, and it did feel like he was putting himself in a really good spot early in counts and then just not able to put people away. And that's even the White Sox will be able to take advantage of you making that many mistakes. Like even a bad MLB team can hit you if you're just going to leave stuff right over the heart of the plate. And he is such an enigma to me because I really believe in Tobias Myers, like long term especially. But right now it's been a struggle, especially of late when he's made starts. So we got to see him get through at least 5 innings sometimes. That would be really nice to see from him.
Yeah, I think I just go back to it's not atypical for a young pitcher who doesn't have a
No.
lot of experience. So I guess that we can kind of draw some positives from that. Like it is a pretty standard development pattern that you see for a lot of guys. But Spencer, do you have any thoughts on kind of what the next step is for Myers here, or just kind of where you see him progressing from here?
I mean, I think it really is just going to come down to, and you're right, it's honestly kind of similar to things we used to see with Corbin Burns and Brandon Woodruff. Like, one, avoiding the big inning. He's gotten a lot better in the early parts of his starts, which he did struggle with early on. We talked about that. He seems to be getting through the first a little bit better. His velo's not really taking a while to amp up like it was early on, but avoiding that big inning and then just not making as many mistakes when you're in good pitchers counts. And like you said, it's not an uncommon trait. It's just something where you have to make sure he's not losing confidence because of stuff like this. In fact, if I were in his position, or if I were in a Brewers pitching coach or whatever, that type of position, I would be telling him, like, hey, you clearly have the stuff to get swing and miss, to get yourself into good spots. Now it's just about not making those mistakes when you have the opportunity to put them away. So honestly, as weird as it sounds, in some ways, you probably feel better about Myers than you did early on, because he's constantly putting himself in these spots where early on he was kind of just getting hit in the first inning, or like you mentioned with the Cubs start, he was walking people. It's kind of a give and take. He's just got to go find that happy medium between what he was doing early on, where he was kind of getting into these counts and then walking people because he was being too careful, and now obviously making too many mistakes. But I do like Myers, and I do think we're going to continue seeing Tobias Myers making starts as we move forward here. So hopefully he starts to figure some things out.
The real story of this one was the Brewers putting up 8 runs over the final 2 innings of this game, which really helped them get to that 12-run total. They had a 6-run 7th inning, and this was an interesting sequence to watch unfold, because it was essentially the Brewers just beating the White Sox to death with paper cuts throughout that entire inning. And I think it was a combination of some batted ball luck, some not so great execution by the pitching staff for the White Sox, especially their bullpen, and just some really shoddy defense too on their part. Kind of walking through this inning here a little bit. The rally started with a Sal Frelick single, then Blake Perkins hitting an infield single, and then a Bryce Terang RBI ground ball single. Another highlight of the inning was Christian Yelich hitting a check swing ground ball double down the left field line, and that kind of speaks to what I just talked about. The Brewers in this inning had 6 ground ball singles. I believe there was a Jake Bauers infield single in there as well. There was another line drive. I can't remember who hit it. It probably should have been caught, but Tommy Pham is playing center field for the White Sox. And
That was
Tommy
Frelick's
Pham,
second hit of the inning.
that was Frelick's second hit.
Yep.
Tommy Pham should not be playing center field for any big league team. He's maybe passable in a corner spot at this stage of his career, but again, just kind of showing everything that's going on there. So I'm not going to chalk this one up entirely to bad luck. Obviously, the Brewers were at least putting good pitches in play, but this was an interesting sequence to watch. It just seemed like everything they hit somehow found a hole, and kind of like I talked about, just a combination of different things making that happen. What was kind of going through your head as you were watching all of the madness unfold here?
I mean, it was obviously very enjoyable from a Brewers fan perspective, but it did not feel very sustainable or like something you would want to rely on moving forward at any point. 6 ground ball singles in an inning is absolutely insane. It kind of reminds you of that Marlins Robert Gasser game in a way, where the Brewers were on that end of the spectrum. So it does happen. It's just not something you want your offense to be built around. You certainly take it when it happens, but it was funny. I was laughing a lot when Yelich hit his double, because that was just like the epitome of what was happening that inning. It fit so perfectly with what was going on, and he had a good game too. We should mention he had 5 hits in that game, but most of them were on the ground, so there was some luck involved, and especially on that one. But yeah, it was fun, but it didn't feel like something I would want the Brewers to keep trying to do moving forward.
Final note for this one as well. The Brewers setting the high for the season, so any team in baseball this season, with 23 hits in a single game. 18 of those 23 hits were singles. And again, kind of what you talked about, this is not something you want to rely on, but I don't want to just fully take the route of the Brewers just got a ton of luck in this game. I do think this kind of ties into a larger point that, some people have been talking about, I think both of us included. And I did a story about this too during this White Sox series. The Brewers are scoring runs in all kinds of different ways night to night. And I actually think that bodes well for the sustainability of just having a solid offense. They're probably not going to finish the season as like a top 3 offense, which is where they were at, a few days ago was the last time that I checked. But this is a solidly above average lineup and probably the best that the Brewers have had in quite some time. Like you can go back several years to the last time the Brewers had a group that I think is going to be this sustainably above average. So I would definitely put them in the top third of MLB teams, probably in the upper half of the NL, maybe not, again, top 3 in baseball, but they're going to have nights like this where they're beating you with the singles. They're going to have nights where they're beating you with the power. They have had nights like that. So I think that when you have an event like this, you can kind of say, yes, there was a lot going right here, but it also does speak to, the Brewers can play different kinds of baseball because they have such a diverse lineup. If you have nights where the power is not there, then you could have nights where some of, the single heavy guys start to break out a little bit and they have some things go their way one night. Then you can have another game where things aren't going the way you would want for some of those singles hitters and those ground balls are finding gloves. Well, then you have some power bats in that lineup who could potentially step up and drive a ball more and you're going to score that way. So I think that's what we've seen a lot from this team. What do you think, Spencer?
I mean, I agree completely. I feel like having a balanced lineup is just something the Brewers haven't been able to do for a while. You look at last year, they lacked the power. In years prior, a lot of fans were complaining because all they could do was hit a home run, and that was pretty much the only way they were going to score runs. This feels like the first year in quite some time where it does feel like you can win a game doing stuff like this and stealing bases and even bunting for hits and that type of stuff. But you can also have the Rhys Hoskins, the Gary Sanchez, those types of additions who are adding a bunch of power to the mix. And people like Yelich and Contreras, obviously back from last year, Willie Adames, you have that power, but you also have, and I would note too, with guys like Contreras and Yelich, especially, like they have all of that balance in their own profiles offensively. They don't just hit for power. The other 3 are more on the pure power spectrum, maybe Willie the least of the 3, but still more towards power than pure hitability, I would say. But with guys like Frelick and Terang and those types of guys who are going to be on base for the people who hit for power, like that's what you're looking for in a balanced lineup. And Joey Ortiz, I got to talk about him too, but there's been just a lot of solid performance around the lineup, but it's not everybody doing the same thing. And that's exactly what you said. It can lead to games like this. It can lead to a game where in that Cubs series, you need the Gary Sanchez home run to win you a game because that's what he does. That's what he's on the team for. And it just gives you a lot more possibilities to score runs and makes you more dangerous, honestly, to a pitching staff if you can do all of those things. So it's been a lot of fun to watch compared to recent years. And I'm a big pitching guy, but it is fun to have a fun offense again, for sure.
Yeah, definitely a dynamic group to watch. That's a word that Christian Yelich used to describe these guys when I asked him about it. I think it was after this game. Just dynamic is the word he used. He, kind of talking about how we can do all kinds of different things. And one thing he said that I agree with, and I thought was interesting, kind of going along the lines of what we've been talking about here, is when you have multiple ways to score. He said, I think that helps you avoid offensive droughts. And ironically, as we get later into this episode, the Brewers hit really their first offensive drought of the year in the very next series. But up until then, they had avoided any droughts. I know I looked at the numbers for the piece I wrote, and it was like every time that they had a really low scoring game, I can't remember what I picked for the cutoff. I think it was like 3 runs or less. Almost every time they came back with a big day the following game and got right back on the horse. So just not sustained struggles really for them a whole lot this year. And I think that does speak to how much balance they have in that order now. So kudos to Matt Arnold in the front office. I think they recognized what the need was for this team. I think they knew they had contact and speed, and we saw a little bit of that last year, but that was all they had last year. And you can't score exclusively when that's all you have. So they knew they needed to add power. They did that in Rhys Hoskins and Gary Sanchez. And I would still argue in Jake Bauers, who's cooled off a little bit as of late, but he has still given them some power in the middle of that order. He's still at like a league average slash line, by the way. I'll just throw that in there really quickly. But it's worked very well for the Brewers, just like how you would expect. So the offense came from behind against the White Sox in the first 2 games of this series. So they did that in game 1 en route to that 12-5 win. And then they did it again in game 2 when they beat the White Sox 4-3 in 10 innings. Robert Gasser got the start in this one 5 innings for him, 7 hits allowed, 3 earned runs, and those runs scoring on a pair of home runs, 3 strikeouts. Then the velocity was down for him by a couple ticks, especially on that four-seamer. He didn't throw a lot of them. The ones he did throw early on, he was down like 2 miles an hour, like sitting 89 to 91 with it. So they kind of scrapped that the rest of the way and went more heavy on the sinker to try to get some weak contact. And credit to him that he was still able to battle through. And it kind of made a little bit more sense a few days later when it was revealed that he had a flexor strain. He's on the 10-day or 15-day IL. Sorry, it's 15 for pitchers, 10 for position players. He's on the 15-day IL, and we'll talk a little bit more about his outlook and what his future look like, or what the Brewers are planning here as far as what his future looks like when we get to the injury update section towards the end of the show. But that was Gasser's evening on the mound, and then Willy Adames was really responsible for the 2 big hits in the comeback here. He came up in the 7th inning and hit a ground ball single up the middle to tie it, and then he came up again in the 10th with a walk-off infield single with the infield drawn in, and that was how the Brewers won it. So again, doing a lot of damage, quote unquote, with ground ball singles. But again, just kind of speaking to the different ways that the Brewers can beat you. You're not going to be able to beat guys like this every day, but some days you can. And again, a little bit of luck required to make that happen, taking advantage of a bad defense. But again, still, they got the job done. A couple of side notes from this game. Trevor McGill returned from getting drilled in the forearm by a line drive a few days prior. He punched out the side in a perfect 7th inning, and then Hobie Milner did a nice job in the top of the 10th to get it to a position where the Brewers could walk it off at the end. So nice work for him. And then we'll move on to the final game of the series, Game 3. The Brewers taking that one by a score of 6-3. Freddie Peralta got the ball in this one, and the outing was kind of dampened a little bit by a long first inning. He did settle down to go 5 in this one, but he gave up 2 in the first through 43 pitches. So his day ended at 5 innings, 4 hits, 3 earned runs, a walk, 7 Ks, and a homer. And I know we've talked before, Spencer, about how there's still another gear in Freddie Peralta that we're all kind of waiting to see come out consistently, just to ascend to that next level of being the horse at the top of the rotation. He's still having a good year by almost every metric except ERA. Ironically, I think ERA is the metric that likes him the least right now. But I feel like this is the kind of stuff that we're talking about when we talk about how, it does still need to get better for the role that he's been tasked with filling and the amount of experience he has too at this point as he's stepping into this role. I mean, you're going out there on a getaway day against the worst team in baseball and the worst lineup in baseball. The expectation there is that you're going to go out and you're going to shove and you're going to eat some innings. And, this should be an easy game. Now, granted, if they come out and they just put some good swings on you, whatever, there's not a whole lot you can do. But he came out and he was getting ahead of guys, especially in that first inning, 0-2, 1-2, and then just missing with pitches that were nowhere close. And that extends the count, extends the pitch count, also puts them just in a better hitting position. That brings them back into the at-bat, where all of a sudden they're more likely to get a pitch that's over the plate because you're just trying to end it now. And that puts you in a position to get hit in 2 strike counts. And I think it's important to note for Freddie Peralta, I don't think that efficiency or always working super deep into ball games in the way that we would see Corbin Burns do it when he was at his best, I don't think that's always going to be there for Freddie or ever really consistently, just because of the kind of pitcher he is. He's basically a 3 true outcomes pitcher. It's a lot of strikeouts, decent number of walks, and then some home runs in there. So as a byproduct of that, especially the strikeouts and the walks, you are going to have a lot of deeper counts. That said, there are some things that he can do to shave that pitch count down a little bit. And again, it's when you're getting ahead of guys, you got to throw a pitch that's not in the zone, but at least in the general vicinity where guys would be tempted to swing at it. You can't be getting ahead 0-2, and then we've seen this slide. He gets ahead 0-2, 1-2, and then uncorks a fastball that's at like the brim of the helmet. Like, guys are not going to swing at that. And in that counts, when you want to throw a fastball, that's where you got to get one that's, maybe, I don't know, shoulder height, like to the point where it's a little bit above the zone, but it's still tempting. and you can get kind of a defensive swing with 2 strikes, like those are the kind of pitches you need to execute in those counts.
Yeah, like we talked about, there's been a lot of disappointing features of a season, but like you said, he's really been fine. It's not like we're not trying to rip on Freddie when we say these things, but you were hoping to see a bigger breakout, and 43 pitch first innings, any inning, really, that's not going to work. You just can't put yourself in that position. And credit to him for limiting it to 2 runs, because that could have been a much, much worse inning. And then, of course, for settling down and giving 4 innings where he did pitch pretty well. But this type of stuff just can't happen. And I shouldn't say that. It can't happen as often as it's happened for him this year. Everybody's going to have a bad game once in a while. We saw Corbin have some rough games with the Brewers. We've seen Woodruff have rough games. It's not like you can't have it happen once in a while, but when you're facing a lineup like the White Sox and you just can't put anyone away, and like I said, it's not because of your stuff. It's because you're just missing in completely uncompetitive areas of the, not even of the plate, nowhere near the plate, really, is where he was missing on a lot of them. You touched on the super high fastballs. He just yanked a lot of sliders that were nowhere near the zone, low and outside. You're not going to get chases on those. And the thing is, his stuff is good. He can make a slight mistake and maybe even miss with a fastball at the top of the zone when he misses, because it's got that ride. It plays well up. Like, it's okay to miss that way. But when you're missing in a spot that's, like you said, above their eyes, no one's swinging at that. We don't have pitchers hitting anymore, so no one's swinging at that. You're not getting any type of, it's just not a productive pitch in any way. It doesn't even help you later in the count when you miss that badly. You can't throw anything off of that mistake to try and use it as like an advantage to throw something else. So it's, you just keep hoping he's about to figure it out. And you see a lot of signs. He had 2 good starts in a row with the Marlins and, was that the Cubs? Yeah, Marlins and Cubs. And those were both 1 earned run, both homers, saw the strikeouts pile up. And then he kind of has a little bit of a setback in this past game against the White Sox. So you're seeing good things, but you're also seeing everything that we worry about with Freddie. And you just got to see a little bit more consistency. And I don't want to harp on it like we did the last time, but what we saw in the second half last year was exactly what you're hoping you get out of Freddie over the course of a season. Like, there was pretty much never a bad game after, I believe, the Braves start he made in July. Right after the All-Star break, I think his first start after the break was not very good. And then that guy just shoved for the rest of the season. And you're not, like I said, there's going to be a bad game once in a while, but it's just been happening too often. And that's the main thing that I think we got to see more consistency out of him. And he's capable of it. We've seen it.
Right. The final note I want to make on that front, we keep comparing him to Corbin Burns and Brandon Woodruff a lot because he is being asked to basically ascend to that role that those guys had. I'm also going to note here, just from my perspective, I don't think Corbin Burns was fully living up to what he was supposed to do last year as well.
He wasn't.
So like that's a distinction I want to make, because if you're comparing to these guys, I just want to be fair and fully transparent about that. I guess Woodruff's probably
no argument for me on that.
Woodruff's probably the better comparison, and
yes,
because Woodruff was really the only guy who year in, year out for a long stretch when he was on the mound, you just never saw problems like these. Like you start once in a while where he just gets hit, but otherwise you would never really see these stretches where it's, well, the command has evaded him for 5 hitters here, or the walks started piling up for a little bit, or anything like that, or the pitch selection didn't seem great here. Like it just all was really coming together for him, and it never really seemed to fall apart at any point. Corbin, for his part, I think was capable of doing that. I think it was mainly just a pitch usage issue for him, and not always applying the best game plan, or just sometimes not even being aggressive enough in the strike zone with his own stuff. So it's a different issue for each of those 2 pitchers. But I think, just going back again, like Freddie's being asked to fill a very important role here, and with that role come very, very high standards.
Yep.
And part of the reason he has those high standards is not only because he's in that role, but also because he's just capable of that. And again, that's why the Brewers trust him now to do this, and that's why you feel comfortable with Brandon Woodruff missing a year with the shoulder surgery. You feel comfortable with trading Corbin Burns in his final year of control, because you think you have a guy who can step into that role pretty seamlessly. And it hasn't been seamless yet. Definitely a lot of good, but also some stuff to work on. Let's get back to the game now, though, after that side tangent. The Brewers, again, coming through with a big inning in this one, a 4-run inning in this game. Jake Bauers hit an RBI double, and Jackson Churio hit a 3-run home run. This is just what I keep coming back to with Churio. We'll keep this tangent pretty quick here, but I really think you got to find a way to just keep getting him big league at bats, because
Yes.
again, this is another example of he got a pitch over the plate. I believe this was a slider from Nick Nastrini that was like right down the middle, and he hammered it. And he hammered it with, again, a swing that was not outrageously violent. Like, it's the bat speed and the explosiveness is there, but it's also like controlled. Like, if you watch the video of these home runs he's hitting on mistake pitches, there's not like a giant backswing or anything that's coming with any of these swings. And that's what I keep coming back to. If he goes down to the minor leagues, he's just going to be seeing more mistakes that he can punish. And I don't think that helps his development a whole lot. I think he needs to be up here. I think that if you get to a certain point where he stops hitting the mistakes too, then you can start thinking about a demotion. But right now, what he's struggling with are things that he's going to get more exposure to in the big leagues. So I really feel like you need to find a way to try to get him some at bats and just keep him up here. I really think that's the best way forward for him.
Yep, agreed. I will say though, if he's only going to be a weak side platoon hitter, then AAA might be better for him, because that's pretty much what he's been. I know Nastrini was a righty, but it's been it's been limited playing time for him, even after like the stretch where he really sat. Like, at some point we got to figure out if we're going to do it that way, or if we're going to say we do need to let him play more regularly in the minors. So I agree with what you're saying completely. It's just a matter of, will we actually do that? That one I'm not as sure on.
Right. And I don't know either. And that's why I made the distinction of, like, they need to find a way to play him in the big leagues, not just keep him here, because it doesn't do him any good to sit on the bench a whole lot either. I feel like there's more opportunities to use him. Like, I know there might be a trade-off with you might not get the production right away. But I come back to as well, like using him or at least letting him hit in bigger spots.
Yes.
Than Pat Murphy has allowed him to for much of the year. I think that's part of it as well. But the Brewers are going to face an interesting decision there, especially with Garrett Mitchell on the mend, which we'll talk about a little bit more later. The real story of this game, though, was that it was the Kevin Herget game. So the Brewers and Pat Murphy wanting to stay away from the A guys in this game, which, by the way, I loved that decision. Like, you're just going to need to have games where you do that, and this is the perfect opportunity to try to sneak one out. You've already won the series. You're playing against a really bad team. Like, this is the day where you just say all the high leverage guys are off limits, and we're just going to need these guys to finish off the game for us, for better or for worse. So kudos to Pat Murphy for playing it that way. I really think you do need to manage like that at times. And it comes back to what we've talked about. The pen management is definitely getting better than what we saw early in the season. So I want to make sure we're giving him credit for that. But it was Kevin Herget and Enoli Paredes tasked with covering the final 4 innings of this one. Kevin Herget pitched those first 2 innings, so the 6th and the 7th, and he faced 6 guys in those 2 innings, and he struck out 5 of them. I'd be willing to bet that most people, well, not most people, but some people didn't even know who Kevin Herget was before this game. If you're a sicko like we are, you knew who Kevin Herget was. But I don't think even we thought just a whole lot of him, because no disrespect to Kevin Herget. He's definitely had an interesting career path, and he's persevered through a lot of adversity throughout his career. So credit to him for getting back here. But he was in that role of just kind of last guy in the bullpen. You're going to fill some low leverage innings for us. This is his first chance to work high leverage. This was his first career big league hold in this game. And he came out and shoved. And a lot of it was due to the changeup that he was throwing. And I honestly don't know how I had missed this before, because usually I feel like I'm watching pitch shapes and things of that nature like a hawk whenever it comes to any random guy who might be part of the Brewers organization. But he has a really good changeup, and he's really good at, so I talked to him about this after the game, because I was kind of looking, and this was the first time I'd really paid a whole lot of attention to it. I'm like, this changeup is spinning a lot, and it's got a ton of lateral movement. So a lot of fade away from a lefty into a righty, whatever. And he's throwing it more than any other pitch. So I kind of asked him after the game, I'm like, so what kind of changeup do you throw? Because it's very clearly not the traditional, straight change or circle change where you're just trying to kill the spin and get more vertical drop as it's coming through the zone. I'm like, no, you're spinning this thing a lot, and it's very clearly not a standard changeup. So he said it's like the high spin, side spin changeup to try to get as much of that lateral movement as possible. He's like, I don't really care how much it spins. I don't care, that it's not dropping. In my mind, it's just all about pronating and getting that lateral movement. And in his case, that means he wants more of that spin because that's what's giving him that lateral movement now. So he basically told me, he's just like, I'm trying to pronate as best I can and just let it rip. And he definitely did that in this game. So credit to Kevin Herget. Murphy did send him out for a third inning, at which point he threw 8 straight balls for consecutive walks. So probably got a little bit greedy there. And I think he just ran out of gas at the end. But really cool to see Kevin Herget get his moment to shine in the big leagues, picking up his first career hold. It was then Enoli Paredes who got to pitch the final, cover the final 6 outs, I should say, because Herget started the 7th. He got a little bit of an assist to get out of that 8th inning. So there was a ground rule double that would have scored a run had it not been a ground rule double, but it was a ground. I believe this would have been the tying run at the time because they were up by 1. This is before Gary had the insurance hit, because that came in at the bottom of the 8th, right?
Yep.
So that would have tied the game, but it was a ground rule double. And then there was a sac fly. Well, attempted sac fly, I should say, at which point they were able to double him off. There was a caught stealing in there before the double too, wasn't there?
The first batter Paredes came in for, he threw a wild pitch, or it bounced away from Sanchez a little bit, and Sanchez picked it up and threw Remillard out at third. So that was the first out. Then that ground rule double you were talking about, because the guy on first didn't advance to second on that play even. So he had to stay at first, and then he ended up having to stay at third on the ground rule double, which was Pham, I suppose. And shallow fly ball to Yelich, and an aggressive send, I would say. But to be fair, with Yelich's arm, it was probably worth it with 2 outs, in my opinion. There's a pretty good chance that thing's not online or thrown super hard. So, but yeah, we don't even have it on here, but there was a little dust up afterwards with some fun fireworks after the game too. Tommy Pham's a very tough guy. Just ask him. I will note too, on that play, Pham ran like 6 feet inside the third base foul line. I think he was trying to get in the way of the throw because he knew it was going to be, it was going to beat him most likely. But funny enough, I think if he took an outside route, he would have had a pretty good chance to dive into home plate around the tag. And also that play was too far into left center to have any chance of getting in the way of that throw. So it was a really weird on his part all the way from start to finish.
Yeah, I'm not gonna say that was like malicious the way that he played it. I think he had that idea in mind of trying to disrupt it, like cleanly disrupt it, and as that whole thing as that whole thing unfolded, it did not. The odds were not in his favor there the entire time. So
no. Yeah, I should say it's completely legal to do what he was trying to do. The only time you have a runner's lane is a set runner's lane is going from home to first. The rest of the time you create your own lane. So you can do that. I just don't think he had any chance of ever getting in the way of that throw. So it was a weird choice in my eyes.
Yeah. So just kind of talking about the way that game ended, and then also the way the Brewers kind of snuck out with one in game 2. One of the first things I tweeted after this sweep was the White Sox lost these last 2 games more so than the Brewers won them. Because I think anyone who was watching this game would probably realize the Brewers didn't play great baseball in those last 2. They were fine in game 1. But those last 2 games, like, they snuck out with a couple because this is a really, really, really bad team. Like, they don't do anything well. And you watch the way that they play baseball and some of the boneheaded decisions that they made. Like, granted, you take a win any way you can get it, but I think if we're really going to be objective here with trying to break down this series, like, the Brewers did not earn a series sweep here. The White Sox gave it to them.
Yes. You could argue that there was some signs of what happened in the next series starting at the end of the White Sox series, I would say, because the Brewers weren't playing great baseball at that point.
Yeah, we're going to dive into that next series now, in which the Brewers were swept in 3 games by the Phillies. So after sweeping the worst team in baseball, they got swept by the best team in baseball, both in 3-game series. The Brewers offense only scored 2 runs in 3 games. They were thrown out at the plate twice as many times as the number of runs they scored. They were thrown out at the plate 4 times. They made 4 outs at home, and they scored 2 runs. I do think that's a little bit of a testament to just nothing is going your way when on every aggressive play like that, the Phillies convert. And I do think like you're putting pressure on the defense there with some of the sends in this series, and we'll break each of them down as we're going through. So just not a whole lot going right for the Brewers. They didn't hit well either, to be clear. But again, you go and you face a good team. We'll break it down here because this is definitely a tough series to watch. So it was also the Rhys Hoskins homecoming series, though. So that's the positive takeaway from that. But we'll dive into it here, starting with game 1. That was Phillies 3, Brewers 1. The first out at home for the Brewers came in the 3rd inning of this one. Bases loaded, nobody out. Bryce Durang grounds into a double play, and Bowers is thrown out at home for the lead out. In the 5th inning, Rhys Hoskins is thrown out at the plate on an aggressive send by Jason Lane when Blake Perkins singles up the middle. I thought this send was okay. I mean, base it up the middle. There's 2 outs. It was definitely aggressive, but I went back and I watched the replay a couple times. Like, I don't think it was terrible. Like, you're still forcing them to make a good throw, and if that throw is offline, Rhys scores.
Yeah.
So I think it was pretty standard. You got to send them with 2. And it wasn't like it was a situation where the Phillies had time to recover from a bad throw and still retire Rhys at the plate. So I was fine with this. I know that anytime it happens, it generates some controversy, but I don't know how you felt about it, Spencer.
I thought this one was a little iffy just for a couple of reasons. One, Rojas has a cannon in center, and he's a very, very good thrower of the baseball. 2, you've got Rhys coming off of a recent hamstring injury. Having him open it up on a play that's going to be close at the plate is a little iffy to me to begin with. Not to mention it's Rhys, who's very, very slow. I don't disagree, though, that I wasn't upset with this one. I do think it was an iffy send, but I also get that everything you said I agree with as well. In that scenario, all it took was that throw going 2 feet up the first base line, and he's probably going to be safe. So I get why people were a little annoyed by that one, but I also think now if that would have been 1 out or something, absolutely, that would be a terrible send. But with 2 outs, it's a very different ball game in that scenario. So I was fine with it, but I do get why people would be a little upset about it. And I will say the hamstring thing to me is a little bit of a even more iffy thing. I know that you don't want to play, like if he's playing, he should be able to open it up and go. But he's also a guy who dealt with a lot of leg injuries over the last couple of years, including a really big one. So he's one I would probably just be a little bit safer with in general. Either way, it's like I said, in the end, I was fine with it. It did take a really good throw and a good tag by Real Muto too.
Hoskins would be responsible for driving in the lone run of this game for the Brewers. A little bit later, he hit a solo home run off Zach Wheeler in the 7th. It was a pretty interesting moment for him to hit a home run in front of the formerly home crowd. Kind of a mix of boos and cheers for him this whole weekend, including on that play. But good for Rhys. Got a chance to come home and just get reacclimated with the home crowd and with the city where he made a lot of contributions for the first portion of his career. So that was really the only heartwarming moment from this series. We also do need to give a shout out to Jared Koenig, though, on the pitching side. He opened each of the first 2 games in this series with the Phillies having a lefty-heavy lineup, which, by the way that Murphy's used him as an opener against both the Phillies and the Red Sox now, I like that a lot.
Agreed.
I think that you look at the way this Brewers rotation is structured right now, they're basically on like their 8th and 9th starters at this point. Like we're starting guys who probably should be relievers now, Bryce Wilson included, who got the ball in this game. Bryce Wilson does not have a single pitch that profiles well against a left-handed hitter. He just doesn't. And if you actually look at what he's done the last 2 seasons now with the Brewers, he's got about as drastic of platoon splits as you could have. I'd be willing, I haven't looked up the standings, but I'd be willing to bet he has statistically been one of the most effective pitchers against right-handed batters for probably the last 20 months. And he has also been one of the least effective pitchers to left-handed batters in that same span. So the Phillies leading off their lineup with Kyle Schwarber at the top, Bryce Harper batting third. You also have Bryson Stott batting fifth, too. So Koenig got the open in this game through a perfect 5-pitch first inning, and then gave way to Bryce Wilson, who went 5 2/3, 6 hits, 3 earned runs, a walk, a K, and a home run. Just a very standard Bryce Wilson outing. I don't think we need to really dive into anything there. Moving on to game 2, the Phillies coming from behind to beat the Brewers in this one. We'll have a little bit more to talk about in this one on the pitching side. The Brewers, though, offensively getting on the board first with an RBI groundout by Andrew Monasterio in the 3rd inning. Jared Koenig, once again, getting to open this game. He recorded 4 outs with 2 Ks and then gave way to Colin Ray. Murphy with an aggressive hook for Ray in this game, which I liked because you had a situation where the bullpen was very fresh and you had a win in front of you. So Ray only went 4 in this one. Not really a byproduct of pitch count. He could have gone another, but Murphy, knowing that he had arrested Penn, went to Brian Hudson, who rebounded with some really nice relief work, got out of a jam for Ray, and then went an inning and 2/3, a couple Ks, just doing a really nice job keeping the Phillies off the board there. This was only the 3rd time this year that Colin Ray has failed to complete at least 5 innings. So he's been Mr. Dependable for the most part. But again, this is one where you could play a little bit more aggressively with the bullpen. What threw me off a little bit here, though, was playing it more aggressively with the bullpen. Murphy went to Elvis Peguero in the 8th inning. And on Peguero's 3rd pitch of the evening, he was supposed to throw a sinker down and in to Alec Boehm. Instead, the sinker was at the letters, and Boehm did not miss it, hitting a game-tying home run to even the game at 1 apiece. Yoel Payamps had not yet appeared in this game, and at first I was wondering if he was unavailable for some reason, but Payamps would then come in the 10th and give up the walk-off double to Nick Castellanos, so he was available. This one was a little bit dicier for me. I kind of looked into it more, and statistically, Peguero does have a leg up on Payamps in quite a few metrics. But at the same time, I just go back to Payamps has a really high percentage of scoreless appearances or appearances without an earned run this year. He's really just had a couple blow-ups, and he's been throwing the ball extremely well as of late. So I'm not quite sure why we have Elvis Peguero seemingly ahead of him on the pecking order in that game. I don't know if there was something he really liked with the matchups there with the sinker. But it was an interesting choice to me. And Peguero, to me, is kind of like the reliever Freddie in the sense that he probably should be an elite reliever just based on the stuff. I mean, he throws an upper 90s sinker that drops more than most sinkers do. That's not easy to do when you throw that hard to generate the kind of movement he does. And then he's got, a low 90s gyro slider that he pairs with it. And everything between the whiff rates and the ground ball rates is an elite combination. But he just has moments where the execution's not there, and he'll walk a bunch of guys in certain stretches, or you'll have an at-bat like that where he throws a strike, but he doesn't hit his spot or come anywhere close to it. So probably not my choice to pitch the 8th there. I don't think it was an egregious decision or anything. You can debate it a little bit more, but I don't know what thoughts were going through your head in that 8th inning there.
Yeah, Peguero's a guy that I just have I have a hard time trusting him. His whip is over 1.5. It feels like he's walking or giving up a leadoff hit the majority of the time he comes into games.
He's giving up a lot of hits. I haven't looked into it enough to know if is he just making that many mistakes, or is he getting bit by some bad luck a little bit? The BABIP's up like 40 points from where it was last year. And I don't know how much of that is deserved. I haven't looked into it yet.
Right. But a guy who he doesn't strike out a ton of guys, probably about 7.5 per 9. He walks over 4 per 9. To me, those aren't high leverage guys. Those are just solid middle relievers. I think you have to have some swing and miss to be able to do this in that type of role. And that's part of we talked about it with like Abner earlier in the season too. Like you have to be able to get swing and miss. And you mentioned it. Peguero should have the stuff to get swing and miss. But to me, that does point to somebody who makes too many mistakes and leaves too many pitches in hittable spots. And you can definitely relate that to a guy like Freddie as well, where either it's uncompetitive or it's too hittable when he gets into these opportunities to strike people out. But with Peguero, the one thing that he's really done this year is not give up home runs. So his FIP looks great when you look at it. But to me, somebody with a strikeout to walk ratio under 2 probably shouldn't have a great FIP usually, especially if the walks are up. It's just a matter of I don't think he had given up one home run until I think this was the first home run he had given up.
It was. Yeah.
Which
I'm gonna look up the xFIP for him, because sometimes I don't think it's a great stat, but it's interesting to look at. Okay, so he's now that he gave up the home run, it's a 3.4 FIP and a 3.92 xFIP. I want to look up what was it before that outing. That's what I'm a little bit more curious
the
about.
Actual FIP or the xFIP?
The xFIP before he gave up that home run.
Yeah.
I'm gonna see what we got here. If I can get faster at pulling this up. I'm pulling Fangraphs up on the spot here. So he was at a 2.87 FIP and a 3.8 xFIP.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, solid middle reliever. Maybe not. Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
But yeah, either way, he's just a guy I do struggle to trust in those spots. I don't think I should have to feel that way because, like I said, and you talked about it, the stuff is good enough to be in that type of role, but it just feels like he doesn't. And like I said, it kind of adds up that he doesn't strike many people out with the stuff he has, and he should.
He should, because again, like on a pitch rate basis, he gets a lot of swing and miss.
Yeah.
It just doesn't turn into strikeouts, which in my mind, that always comes back to, maybe there's a sequencing problem, or just he's not making good put away pitches to get those strikeouts. So, but
yeah. So I mean, that's really where it is. I still trust Payamps. I would have loved to have seen Payamps in that spot, but in the end, it was one solo homer that Peguero allowed, and then he was fine. He got through the rest of the inning. He was coming up on a decent part of their order. After Bohm, I guess it's not terrible. It's not great after Bohm normally, but yeah, I would have gone to Payamps. I'm not overly upset it was Peguero for sure, but it was a decision I would have gone the opposite for sure. I would have been on the other end of the spectrum. So,
I think the thing we need to know most of all, though, is you're probably not beating the Phillies when you only score 1.
100%. Yeah.
So, we can nitpick bullpen decisions all we want.
Yeah.
But again, it comes back to you got to score more. The Brewers did have a chance to score in the 10th inning, and they didn't because they made another out at home. Once again, it was Bryce Terang coming up, this time with second and third, one out. He hit a ground ball. Ollie Dunn thrown out at the plate. So the Brewers coming up empty in that inning, and then the one pitch from Payamps in the 10th, which resulted in a walk-off double by Castellanos. Missed his spot on a first pitch sinker that was up instead of a little farther down in the zone and more inside. But not a great night for the Brewers. This was the tough loss for them, in my opinion, because you had an opportunity to win this one.
Yeah.
But kind of is what it is. Game 3 would not go any better. The Brewers would get shut out this one. They would lose 2-0. Aaron Ashby got the start in this one, and going into this one, it was, in my mind, not ideal that they had to call on him to make another start, because I didn't think going in that he was ready yet, even with some better results in terms of runs allowed in Nashville. Like the strikeout to walk was still not good, and it wasn't good in this game either. He walked 5 guys against 3 strikeouts. 1 or 2 of those walks he might have gotten squeezed a little bit, but it's still 5 walks against 3 Ks. Even if you take those off, like a 3-3 K to walk ratio is not good either in 5 innings. But he did average nearly 95 miles an hour on the sinker. We saw some 96s, and that's not far off at all from where it was last year. And I'm going to give you a chance to talk about this because you were the one who kind of noted it first. But our friend Jake McKibben at Brewer Fanatic sent out a tweet featuring some notes on Aaron Ashby's sinker. You want to kind of break that down a little bit more?
Yeah, for sure. So Interestingly, and I would imagine this is somewhat connected to the shoulder injury to begin with, the Brewers likely had him switch up his arm slot a little bit, arm path. So Aaron Ashby's release height is actually up 4 inches from the last time he was in MLB. He had a 6.4-foot release height on his sinker in 2022, and it had 10 inches of vertical break. So obviously with a sinker, this is basically fighting against gravity. So the lower the number, the more drop you're actually getting on the sinker, which I know battles the brain a little bit for some people, but that is how it works. And this time in his first start after really it's been almost 2 months since he made his first MLB start, but his release is up to 6.7 feet with 9 inches of vertical break, which is very uncommon to get more sink on your pitch by raising your release height, or while raising your release height, I should say. And this was from Lance, I don't know, Brazdowski, I believe is his name. He does a good mailbag on a bunch of pitching stuff usually. But he noted only 3 other pitchers in baseball have release heights over 6.5 feet with below 10 inches of vertical break. And those are Clay Holmes, which one of the better closers in baseball right now, Christopher Sanchez, which the Brewers just saw how well he can pitch on a night. And he was the game 2 starter in this series. And Sean Gel, I don't remember how you say it. He's the very, very tall dude. Very, very tall. I think he's like 6'10". But driveline stuff plus graded his sinker as 146, which is really, really good for the metrics on it. There's still, like Jack talked about, there's a lot of stuff that he still has to work on. He shouldn't have been in this position to have to make a start in MLB right now. And it kind of sucks that he had to before he's ready. But I will say this, based on what we saw and some of the stuff we've found out afterwards, I feel as good about him potentially making an impact in the future as I have since before the injury, because for a long time here, you had no idea if he was ever going to be able to impact the majors again. With this type of shoulder injury, like there's a chance you are just never the same. Seeing the velo climb up back to almost where it was pre-injury, seeing some of this stuff, the movement looked good on all of his pitches. Outside of the changeup that got hit out by Castellanos, he was having a lot of success with the changeup. I think he's going to have to figure out the breaking ball command again, and that's always kind of been the thing with him, even going back to before the injury. But there were a lot of good signs here, and hopefully, again, I would love for him to be able to continue to work on stuff in Nashville. It just seems like that's going to be hard to do. He may end up having to make some more starts up here. But either way, I think the future outlook for Ashby is as good as it's felt in a long time, and that makes me happy because I've always liked Ashby, going back to even right after we drafted him. I got the chance to see him in Appleton when he was in, I guess it was low A back then. Appleton used to be the low A affiliate, and he was only like 91, 92 on his fastball back then. He'd touch a little bit higher, but you could just see all the movement he had on everything. And he added that velo, and I honestly had very high expectations for Ashby before this injury. I'm not sure I'll ever get back to dreaming on his ceiling as much as I did back then, but I really do believe that at one point, as long as he can stay healthy, he's going to help the Brewers again. And that's really good news. There was a very good chance of that not happening. He is somebody who's extended. This is a guy they gave guaranteed money to as well. So hopefully that helps for him. That's a nice, like, a place where he can just kind of sit back and go, okay, even if I'm never healthy, I'm sure that was a little bit of an ease of mind thing for him as he's been coming back through this, is that he was able to lock up some guaranteed money. But for the Brewers' perspective, I think they'll be very happy to get anything positive out of him now that they've seen what could happen. But it was, just the 5 walks looks bad, but it was a really positive development for me watching him in this outing.
Yeah, just the 2 runs in the 5 innings for Ashby on that 2-run homer by Nicholas Castellanos in the 5th. That came right after Ashby had a big double play ball from Kyle Schwarber, so it seemed like maybe he was going to get out of a jam there. I believe he walked 2 guys to start that inning, and that was how he had a couple on, but almost got out of it, and then Castellanos took advantage of a changeup over the plate. But I was going to come back to the point about the contract extension that you made. There's a reason why the Brewers gave him guaranteed money that early into his big league career without having really seen consistent results yet. Because before that shoulder injury, sky was the limit for this guy, and I fully believe that he had the potential to become the best left-handed starting pitcher in baseball. Because you look at what he did. Well, first of all, you just look at the stuff, but you also look at some of the underlying numbers about what he did in his first year or two in the big leagues, even as a starter. I can't remember what I set the cutoff at. I think it was like 125 innings. So people who threw around like 120 innings or more as a starting pitcher in 2022, who had a strikeout rate of 25% or greater, so, pretty well above average, and also had a ground ball rate of 50% or higher. So not only being elite on the ground ball front, but also being really good on the strikeout front. A lot of times guys are either going to be one or the other, because a lot of the times the kind of stuff in modern baseball that's conducive to strikeouts is also going to be conducive to fly balls and home runs. But then some of the pitches that might be more conducive to just getting contact and not getting swing and miss can also be conducive to you get rollovers and get ground balls. So a lot of times it's one or the other. But in Ashby's case, he was one of 3 pitchers that year who did both in that kind of sample size. And when you have both of those abilities, sky really is a limit for you. I don't know if he's really going to get back to that point now, but like you talked about, like everything it's trending in the right direction for him. So, final note from this series, the Brewers getting thrown out at the plate for the 4th time in the series, this time in the 7th inning. William Contreras was thrown out at home. Willie Adames hit a ground ball to Bohm, who was playing back at third base. I thought it was the right call for William to be running on contact here. And this was one where it's like, just give the guy credit. Like, most people are not going to home in that situation. It wouldn't have even been like the tying run or anything. So like there wasn't a whole lot of pressure or incentive to go home, because again, that's why he's playing back. But he saw an opportunity for an out there, and he made a throw that was right on the money. So kudos to him, I guess. Wrapped up a rough series for the Brewers in which they went 2 for 17 with runners in scoring position. But the note that I want to make here is, even after that series, there were some people who, you watch a series like that, and I get it, it's very frustrating. But I think this perception started among some folks that maybe the Brewers have issues with this now. There might be some PTSD from past seasons influencing that as well, because this has been an offense that has not been fun at all to watch for prolonged stretches over the past, 8 years. But even after this series where the Brewers went 2 for 17 with runners in scoring position, at the time of us recording this, so Thursday night, they still rank 4th in batting average at 285 and 2nd in slugging percentage, 495, and weighted runs created plus 144 with runners in scoring position this season. So they have still statistically been one of the best teams in baseball with runners in scoring position. So I don't think this is suddenly an issue. I think it's more just an example of they didn't hit great, but they also faced 3 very, very good starting pitchers. And I don't care what you say, like, good pitching can get solid lineups out or good lineups out. We saw the Brewers do this all the time when they had really good pitching. Like, it's not anything new, and it doesn't have to be indicative of some kind of issue. Sometimes you just get beat by good pitchers and good baseball players and good baseball teams. And that's my takeaway from this series. That's what happened more than anything. And that kind of leads us into our first question that we got from a listener. Supper Club All-Stars asks, while not the ideal way to receive a message, the sweep may not be the worst thing, as it tells the Brewers, yes, there's been a ton, perhaps even unexpected success so far, but there's also areas needing work or more consistency. Like Murph said, it should make them better. Or am I crazy? I don't think you're crazy. I think you're kind of on the right track there. And I'll say this too, like Pat Murphy's messaging after this series, at least to the media, was exceptional. Like, that is exactly how you respond to a series like this. He basically he said to everybody, like, look, man, we could have done better, but at the same time, we played a really, really good team. These guys are good for a reason. They beat us. We didn't beat ourselves. They beat us. There are some things that we can do better. We could have executed better in some spots, but they also pitched us really well. They played us tough. we hung in there the whole series. These were all close games. And at the end of the day, getting to experience something like that and getting that chance to play a really, really good team, like you talked about in your question, that is a good experience for this team. And I honestly think there are more positives to take away from this than there are negatives. And like you asked in the question, it should make them better. Because I think there's that element of, we faced some tough pitching and they shut us down. But at the same time, we played them really close the whole series. Every game we were one big hit away from that being a dramatically different series. And when you're that close as well, there's always a fine line between, the mentality of we got to get better. There's always more work to do. But also you can't overreact. And you can't assume that every time something doesn't go your way or every time you lose, it's because of something that's wrong with your team that needs to be fixed. And I think Murph did a really, really good job striking that balance of like, yep, there were certain at-bats where we could have done better, could have maybe made some better swing decisions, could have, barreled up the ball better here or there. But they also pitched us really well. And we know that we're good enough that we were able to hang with these guys. You don't need to have some massive dramatic takeaway from this whole thing. You got beat by a team that is better than you, but you're also not that far off from beating those guys. At least you weren't in this series. So, keep going to work. It's still an uphill. You can't coast uphill. That's the phrase that Murph's been using all year, and I like that phrase. You can't coast uphill. The Brewers are definitely looking at an uphill battle, especially just kind of when you look on paper at the track records of some of the players they have. But yeah, I mean, he did a very, very good job with the messaging after this. I don't know if you heard the whole post game conference, Spencer, like just on TV or anything, but the takeaways that he had, I think, are pretty much spot on for how you need to approach a series like this, especially in the aftermath.
Yeah, I did not have a chance. I saw a couple of the quotes on Twitter, but I didn't have a chance to watch the whole thing. But what I did see, I agree. I think that's exactly how you need to handle it. That's exactly how you should message things to your team. And I will say, as much as everyone wants to nitpick the offense, and obviously there's reason for that in this series, but the pitching also went out and did a very good job against a very solid lineup for the Phillies. And this is going the three starters, I mean, beyond Jared Koenig's opening, were Bryce Wilson, Colin Ray, and Aaron Ashby coming off a major shoulder injury and barely having pitched in the majors for a couple of years. So I think they showed a lot of what they're able to do. And we talked about how you have to win in different ways. They didn't win these games, but I think they showed an ability to potentially win in different ways by messing around with an opener and throwing different looks at you from the pen and in ways that you can win a game, even if the offense doesn't come around, even though they didn't happen to win these ones. And before we move on from the series quickly, we talked about Koenig opening. We got to talk about him throwing like almost 99 miles per hour a couple of times. He hit 98.9. Like, what is happening? Where did that come from? In 2022, that dude averaged 89 on his sinker when he was with the A's.
He's feeling good, man. Like the reason I didn't bring it up off the bat until you did is because we kind of touched on it last week because that was kind of when it started a little bit. We first saw the glimpses of it. So I didn't want to, repeat a topic too much, but you're right. It was there even more now, like consistently in the last week. I didn't really know what to think of Jared Koenig at first. And I think I said this last week, but he's a dude now.
Yeah.
Because you look at what he's done, and I sent the tweet out. It was like his last 15 innings now. The whiffs are there now. Like he's getting a good amount of swing and miss. That was the thing that he wasn't getting the first 10 times out or whatever. But since then, it's a lot of swing and miss. It's good velocity, and it's a lot of ground balls too. So again, it comes back to what I mentioned with Ashby, like swing and miss and ground balls. That is a deadly combination for any pitcher. And yeah, Koenig's doing it right now, and I'm really starting to get closer to the point where I'm like, okay, this isn't a fluke. Like, he's actually got some good stuff, and he's got a sustainable way to get guys out. So he's been a very big part of this, and I would very much like to keep him kind of in that role where if you're facing, a top heavy, lefty heavy lineup, roll him out there for an inning or two at the start,
Yeah.
and then go to your bulk guys. So he's done a very nice job. But in the interest of time,
quickly,
I was going to transition to keep us on time, and now you're screwing with it.
Sorry, I know. I did actually see some video of him pitching with the A's. It is insane how much better he's rotating, how quickly he rotates now compared to when he was with the A's. Like, it is so much more explosive. And it's just funny to me that a guy going into his 30s could learn how to use his body that much better at that age. It's just, that's always very impressive to me when somebody clearly worked on that type of thing really hard. And yeah, I might actually put a side-by-side of the video on Twitter at some point because it is ridiculous. It's very noticeable, even to the naked eye, like just a ridiculous amount of speed added to his body control and body movement. It's pretty impressive.
I know Matt Trueblood talked to him in spring training the first week that he was down there, and he did a piece kind of talking about some of the things that he worked on to really unlock more of that velocity. So if anyone wants to dive into that a little more, I would highly recommend that you go read that piece. But it is now time for us to keep the program moving. We're going to transition into some loose ends and some other questions that we got here. So we're going to start with Jonathan, who asked us on Twitter, am I crazy for thinking the Brewers will trade for an outfielder at the deadline? Not trade from their outfield depth, but trade for another outfielder to add to the big league mix. And I wouldn't count on it, but I don't think it's a crazy assumption to make, because you can do better than what they've gotten from some of their outfielders offensively. Sal Frelick is at like a league average slash line. Perkins is at like a league average slash line. Churio has not hit. I think he should still get that opportunity, but just objectively, he has not hit well at all. He's been really, really bad on the whole. And I don't think Garrett Mitchell's going to hit. I've never been a big fan of Garrett Mitchell's offensive profile. And now you add in the thumb injury, or it's a broken thumb that he had. But anytime you have a hand injury, that also puts you at risk of, sapping you of your power for a little bit, even after you've technically recovered. Sometimes it takes a little while to just get that form back. So it wouldn't shock me if they did. I don't know what your thoughts are.
Yeah, I'm with you. I do love that both of our first two questions are people asking if they're crazy, but I am I'm in a very similar boat to you. I don't expect them to, but if they went out and they found another opportunity at a Mark Canha type, somebody they think could upgrade the offense, probably not in center, because I think they're going to stick with guys like Perkins and Mitchell who play really good defense, even if the bat's not there in center. But I could see them thinking right field again needs an upgrade like they did last year and going after somebody like that. So, or an ability to move, Yelich can DH. There's always going to be corner outfield time available if they want it to be. So I don't have any names on that, but I do think that's the type of profile they could look into. And if they find the right deal, it would not shock me to see them add an outfielder.
Next question comes from Tyler, who asked us on Twitter, what free agent signing do you see as most likely to soak up some innings in the rotation? Side note, he's not necessarily assuming that they're good innings, just innings. So kind of talking about the Julio Teheran type that we got last year, who actually did throw good innings for the most part. Not sustainably good innings. The peripherals are pretty poor the entire time. But at the end of the day, like in that kind of role for a short sample, it really is the results that matter more. But you got any names, Spencer? I know I was really hoping they would pick up Brad Keller a few weeks ago, which did not happen. There might still be a chance of it because I don't know how long he's going to last in Boston. Yeah, but he would have been my pick. Teheran was on the market for a little bit, but he went back to Baltimore. Right?
Baltimore. Yep.
Yeah.
Baltimore.
So, Greinke's out there.
That's going to be my answer. Not because I actually super want him, but I think it would be incredibly fun. And I would enjoy having Greinke back in a clubhouse talking to Brewers reporters. Jack, you would have a lot of fun, I'm sure, talking to Zach Greinke. So,
that could be an interesting experience. Yeah.
So that would be I honestly can't. It's so hard to find a list of like free agents in season. So I was trying to find like people who were like Johnny Cueto. I know opted back in, or he extended his minor league deal.
He pushed back his opt-out date. Yeah.
Yeah. So he's a name that maybe would have made a little bit of sense if he had opted out of that. But yeah, I struggled to find real names. Greinke was the one that I could think of off the top of my head. So I'll go with Greinke.
I honestly, I was having a conversation about this with someone a few weeks back, but I think Zach Greinke could be passable in a short sample with this Brewers defense behind him. Because he had, when he pitched last year, the results were really, really bad, but he almost never walked guys.
Yeah.
Like no strikeouts to speak of, but he also never walked guys, and he had a really bad Royals defense behind him. So I think that, switching from that defense to the defense that the Brewers have in a small sample, you could beat some peripherals, and that could be a jump of like, 5.5 ERA to 4.5.
Yeah.
And if you get that from a guy like that, in 50 innings or something, just to kind of hold you over till you get healthier, I think it could happen, but we'll see. It does sound like he's leaning towards, considering opportunities.
Yeah.
He's still in shape. He's still working out. I think he's working out at like the Diamondbacks facilities in Arizona.
I think he's always lived out there, so that would make sense.
Right. But I'll throw him out as a name. Maybe I'll hang on to my dreams and hopes of Brad Keller, and we'll see if he gets released again in the near future or DFA'd. Final question we're going to take is from Quinton. He asks, any reason to worry about the offense? This kind of ties into what we talked about in that Phillies series. Still can disappear at times if Contreras or Yelich aren't carrying the load. I disagree with that last statement because, one, Christian Yelich was out for like 15, 20 games earlier in the year, and they kept hitting. Yeah. William Contreras also has not done a whole lot the last 2 weeks now.
Yep.
And that started even before the Phillies series, and they kept hitting even before that Phillies series. So I don't think this, like Contreras and Yelich are definitely the cornerstones of the lineup, but they can still score runs without them. You've got Hoskins back now. Joey Ortiz is having a nice year. Bryce Terang, I think, is still going to end up finishing as a below average bat, and he's already kind of started that descent, but he is still well above average right now. I think he's still around like 115 weighted runs created plus, even after he's tapered off a little bit lately. You've got guys, you got Gary Sanchez still. I still think Bowers is going to give you some pop. Like they can score without them. And again, like it's kind of what we talked about before. It's well-rounded. There's a lot of balance here. So I don't feel any worry whatsoever.
Yeah, I'm with you. I was going to bring up that Contreras does have an OPS in the 500s the last 15 games. Can we please give him a day off, by the way? Anyway.
Yeah, I love the whole it was a cool story when him and Willie went into the clubhouse, or they were in the clubhouse and they went to Murph's office, which, by the way, we were down there and like we were kind of looking around for him, and we noticed that we couldn't find him anywhere. The door to Murph's office was closed, so maybe that's what was going on at that point. But like it's what you want. You want guys who are gamers and who want to play every day. At some point, though, someone's going to have to save this guy from himself.
Yes.
Like it's not a good idea to play this much as a catcher. Willie, I can see maybe a little more. Like Willie has consistently done it too, and it hasn't seemed to have had any lasting repercussions for him. Like shortstop is a demanding position. Catcher is way more demanding than shortstop, though. It's more demanding than any other position on the diamond. And even the DH days, like those are not full days off.
No.
Like and granted, he's getting one. He got one the day we're recording this, but we can give him a day sooner than later where he's not in the lineup.
Yeah, I think the main thing for me is that Contreras just needs a day off. And like you said, the DH days, I think, are better than catching constantly. But I thought the weirdest part of the whole out of the lineup and back into the lineup game against the White Sox is that Gary was going to catch that game, obviously. And then when they made the change, they didn't put William at DH. They put him at catcher and had Gary DH. And it was like, well, I get like maybe forcing his way back into the lineup in the DH spot, but having him catch after all of that just made it even more confusing to me. But I think there is definitely an element of you just need to save him from himself. And that's the job of a manager. I know you absolutely want guys to want to be in the lineup every day. But like you said, it's a totally different ball game when you're talking shortstop versus catcher. It's just not even close to the same thing. And yeah, both of them could probably use a day, but William absolutely needs one more than anyone. And it would be nice to even like double up on an off day. Like I wouldn't hate him sitting game 1 of this Tiger series. I think there's a little element of having an extra day of rest that could help too, and maybe even get you a little bit more recovery. So yeah, that's where we're at. But in terms of the question, because I don't think I ever asked it or answered it completely, I am not worried about the offense.
No. With that, we will dive into Spencer's favorite section of the program. Are you ready, Spencer? Do you want like a drum roll or something? Or, well, too bad you're not going to get one. But it's Spencer's minor league sandbox, where Spencer talks about everything and anything relating to the minor leagues. So take it away.
Thank you, Jack. Yeah, we're going to kick off. We didn't get any questions on the minor league side today, so we'll just jump into some pitching performances as we normally start with. We'll begin with a guy who we've talked about the pitching depth in the majors, somebody we might end up seeing sooner than later. Carlos F. Rodriguez, in his most recent start, which was Wednesday night, he carried a no-hitter into the 6th inning. He recorded 1 out in the 6th, and then he lost it on an infield hit. He ended up being pulled right after the infield hit. So his final line was 5 1/3 innings, 1 hit, 1 earned run because the guy that got on ended up coming around to score. He had 2 walks and 7 strikeouts. So we talked about early on in his season that he was kind of struggling. He was one of the youngest pitchers at the level, so an adjustment period wasn't surprising. Since May started, among pitchers with at least 20 innings pitched in AAA, his 2.84 ERA is in the 87th percentile. His 29.3% strikeout rate is in the 95th. 28.2 whiff rate is in the 82nd. His walk rate is in the 83rd percentile. His 0.89 whip is in the 98th percentile. And like I said, he was the 3rd youngest pitcher to qualify for these stats at the level. So he has definitely figured things out. I'm still not 100% sold on him being ready for MLB outings right now, but I do think if you need to bring him up, if the Brewers get into a point where they still need another starter, I think he could hold his own now. I think there'd be some walk issues and some command issues, but I think he could hold his own now, which is good to see because it was a tough start, and it's really nice to see him bounce back from that. Next, we've got Hayden Robinson. He was the 14th round pick in last year's draft. Another player from this draft that's looking like it could be a pretty interesting guy down the line. He will be 18 for another month. Mid-July, he'll turn 19. In his last start, he went 4 2/3, 2 hits, 1 walk, 1 earned run, and 9 strikeouts. The fastball's in the upper 80s, low 90s, but he throws a curve and a slider with a ton of late, sharp break. Oddly, they're basically the exact same shape, just with different velocities. And then he throws a changeup with a lot of fade and a really big velo difference between the fastball and the changeup. Brewers PD put out some video today, actually, of him throwing in his last game. And I had one guy who had seen him in person reach out to me and talk to him a little bit. He said that the curve and the slider are actually 2 different pitches, but they do literally have the exact same shape if you have the metrics, and that he would imagine, and I would imagine after hearing that the Brewers are going to try and separate those into 2 different shapes, but that both of them are very, very sharp, and there is a pretty big difference in the velocity. So he's going to be a 4-pitch guy, and like I said, another guy from last year's draft that's going to be pretty interesting to follow. Bishop Letson, also from last year's draft. His last 4 starts, he's actually starting right now while we're talking, but I'm not going to include any of that because I don't know what's happening. His last 4 starts, he's got 15 1/3 innings pitched because he's still getting stretched out. A 0.91 whip. He's got 21 strikeouts. He has a whiff rate of 36.9, which puts him in the 91st percentile for the level. His 36.1 strikeout percentage is in the 94th percentile. He is 19 years old. He's 93 to 95. He's topped at 98. He has the most extension on a fastball in all of low A. He's got a good slider and a good changeup. This is genuinely, to me, one of the highest ceiling pitchers in the organization. I think he could be a legit stud, but I think we're a few years away from really seeing that come to the surface. Craig Yoho, we've talked about him a lot. He made his first AA appearance After finally being promoted, he went 2 innings, 5 strikeouts, and the only base runner he allowed reached on an error. So he didn't even really allow a base runner. And then Logan Henderson, who we talked about during his rehab from his oblique, made 2 starts at high A and is already promoted to double A. At high A, he went 6 2/3 innings over those 2 starts, 4 hits, 1 earned run, 2 walks, and 10 strikeouts. He looked like he was dominating the level, so I'm happy they immediately pushed him to double A. I think he is ready for that. On the offensive side of the ball, Filippo Detturi, we've talked about him quite a bit recently. He was promoted to Carolina. I'm curious if that means Cooper Pratt might end up getting bumped to Appleton, because both are probably going to want to spend most of their time at shortstop. So I'm interested to see what happens there. But Detturi finished his time in the ACL with a 956 OPS, a 154 WRC plus, 5 doubles, 2 triples, and a homer. He just looked really good. It sounds like he can handle short. I don't think the power is going to be huge, but really, really good approach at the plate. A new name we have not talked about is Gary Holguin. He was a 2022 international signing. He signed for $450,000. He was out of the Dominican Republic. At the time he was signed, people viewed him as a really good shortstop defender. Oddly, last year he moved to third base pretty exclusively and first base while he was in the DSL. This is his first year stateside with the Arizona Complex League, and he's only played first base and right field. So I don't know if the defense stepped back a little bit, if the Brewers just have so many shortstop and third base options that he just really didn't have a choice. But he has a really, really good arm, so right field could definitely make some sense for him. The big thing that stands out for him is that it seems like the power's been developing recently. He only hit 5 total homers in his first 2 seasons, and that was over 380 plate appearances. But he already has 4 in 84 plate appearances this year. He also has 7 doubles and a triple, so over half of his hits this year are extra base hits. Strikeouts are up. He was 20% last year, and he's at 31% right now. But with that type of power jump, I think that's an okay trade-off. And in 84 plate appearances, a strikeout rate can change pretty quickly still. If he happens to start making some more contact, that could go down very quickly. And then just to talk about some of the DSL guys, some of the guys the Brewers most recently signed in the international class, Jesus Mate homered yesterday in the first at-bat of the season for the DSL Brewers. For the very first at-bat for the Brewers DSL team, he went yard. He actually K'd looking to start the game today and then came out of the game. So I don't know if there's obviously no video or anything. I wonder if he was ejected potentially, because that's a weird thing. A strikeout looking, you would think maybe a strikeout swinging, you pull something or whatever, but not sure what happened there. But he was one of their biggest signings this last year. He got $950,000. He's already 6'2", almost 200 pounds, with what most people consider to be potentially plus raw power. He also has plus speed on the scale and a 60 and potentially 70 arm. So very, very good athlete, especially at that size with big power. They're not sure he'll stick at short, but third could be a really good spot. And with his speed, center field and the arm, I mean, center field could be a really good spot for him too. Yoandro Pena, he replaced Mate today when Mate came out, and then he hit a home run in his spot. So Pena is 4 for 8 so far through 2 games. He actually played first today. Another guy signed as a shortstop, but like I mentioned, there's a lot of shortstops, so it's going to be hard for these guys to all stick there. He signed for $500,000. He isn't, supposedly at the time of signing, he wasn't very strong. Obviously, if you're going deep, there must be at least some wiry strength there, but a lot of scouts believe he's going to grow into some power once he packs on some weight. And again, probably a third baseman long-term. Jose Anderson, he signed for $60,000 out of the Dominican. So this is one of the guys Baseball America labeled as a sleeper in the class. And so far, he has homered in his second game after doubling in his first game. He's 6 foot, 185 pounds. Apparently the bat is a really, really, like, there's just a lot of good signs from what they saw. Hitting in games, they basically said, I'll quote it here. They said, he signed for $60,000 with an impressive track record of hitting in games, especially relative to that signing amount. And yeah, it sounds like defense could be a little interesting, but it's probably a corner outfield spot long term, but the bat is what you're dreaming on here. And then finally, we'll close it out with the top signing of the past international class this last year. Jorge Quintana, he signed for $1.7 million. So whenever the Brewers give out a signing bonus like that, you really take notice. They don't do it a lot. Churio's one of them. Gregory Barrios is one of them, but they don't give 7-figure bonuses to international players very often. So this is a big one. It's mostly a bat-focused profile again. He doesn't chase much. He has a really simple swing. He's a switch hitter, so he has good bat control, and he's performed really well in games from both sides of the plate. He had a walk-off triple yesterday to win the first game of the DSL season, and then he had an RBI double today. Again, another guy they think is going to grow into some more power, but is already showing it even despite kind of a smaller frame for his height. And they do think there's a chance he could develop at shortstop, though, again, not unlike most of these players, third base does seem to be the most likely landing spot for him. So that was probably too long for Jack's liking, but I'm going to jump into a couple injury updates from the minor league side and then go through some major league ones. Luis Lara, one of the top prospects, was activated off the IL and is playing in Appleton again. Alexander Corniel, who actually won the Brewer Fanatic starting pitcher of the month for the minor leagues, happened to be placed on the IL a few days after that. He had been really good for his last 5 or so starts. Josh Adamczewski, another 2023 draft pick, the 15th rounder, really nice looking swing. He has been hurt. He hasn't been able to play in the Arizona Complex League, but he was activated today and will probably make his debut either tonight or very soon. So that is it on the minor league side. On the major league side, I'm going to throw this to Jack because I think he's got a little more insight on some of these than I do.
I do. So we're going to start by revisiting Robert Gasser's flexor strain. He and DL Hall have flown out to visit Dr. Neil Elatrosh this week in Los Angeles. The initial read for DL is that the MCL is intact, so the ligament in his knee. There hasn't been like any major damage to that, but Elatrosh wanted DL to see him in person just to go over the second opinion and figure out what the next steps are. Gasser, this is really where we're going to find out a little bit more about the extent of his injury. Not a great situation that he's in a spot where he needs to get an opinion from one of the most highly regarded doctors in the sports world. When we talk about flexor strains, those can sometimes be a precursor to a more major elbow injury involving the ligament. So we'll see what happens there, but kind of some foreboding signs early on. I don't have any knowledge of anything more than that. I'm just kind of speculating based on what we know about these types of injuries. But with DL, everything that's been reported and that I've heard is MCL looks like it's fine. They're just going to kind of figure out where he goes from here. Jacob Junis made his first rehab appearance on Tuesday in AAA Nashville. He went 2 perfect innings, struck out 3 of the 6 hitters he faced. Sounds like he's at least going to be in some kind of multi-inning role, going 2 innings in that game. We'll see how much the Brewers stretch him out. I know a few weeks ago, Pat Murphy had told us that they were kind of leaning towards maybe bringing him back in more of a hybrid relief type role just to make sure that shoulder stays healthy and to bring him back a little bit sooner, cut down on the rehab time. But we'll see. JB Bukauskas threw a bullpen in Philadelphia over the weekend, and we haven't heard how that's gone. But assuming it went well, his next step is to go to Arizona to face live hitters. And then he is going to begin a rehab assignment in Nashville after that. But it's really just about making sure that he's in game shape, but he is throwing again. Sounds like things are progressing well on that front. Garrett Mitchell flew out to Arizona, so he's also going to be getting some live at-bats now. Just make sure that he gets a chance to swing against real pitching. Then he's going to go on a rehab assignment. Right now, he's targeting the Angels series in Anaheim for a return, which would be June 17th. So we could be just a few weeks away from seeing Garrett Mitchell, and that's when the Brewers are going to have to make some decisions on the makeup of their outfield. Joe Ross then has been playing catch, and he's throwing a bullpen this weekend. So we'll see how that goes for him, and kind of TBD if he's going to need a rehab assignment or not. I know I asked Murphy about it on the last homestand, and he was just kind of like, it's too soon to know. We'll just kind of see how the recovery goes, but he could be looking at a comeback in the near future, potentially still in the month of June. So that would be great for the Brewers rotation depth. We're going to wrap up the show by previewing the Brewers' next series. They're going to wrap up their road trip in Detroit against the Tigers. I will be at this series. That'll be my first opportunity to cover a road game. So we'll have some live updates for you there. There's only so much we can talk about right now in terms of probables because the Brewers have yet to announce a starter for any game this series at the time we're recording this. They may have announced by the time you're listening. But those 3 games for Detroit, Reese Olson, former Brewers pitching prospect who was shipped over to Detroit in the ill-fated and probably ill-conceived Daniel Norris trade from 2021. He's having a really nice year for Detroit. So, hug your pitching prospects as closely as you can.
Well,
Casey Mize will. So he's starting game 1. That's a 5:40 first pitch. Casey Mize is going to be on the bump in game 2. That's a 3:10. And then Tarek Skubal is going to start in the getaway game. That's on Sunday at 12:40 Central. So it's going to be another series where the Brewers are facing some tough arms, especially to front and back end this series. So I don't want to sound too negative, but I do think Brewer fans do need to be mentally preparing themselves for another series loss here. And again, mentally reminding themselves that it's not the end of the world. But I think we're going to see at least one game in this series where the bats come to life again. We kind of talked about it before. I don't think there's going to be any prolonged struggles here based on the makeup of this group. As far as the probables go for the Brewers, Freddie Peralta would be in line to start Friday, but for the series opener, that is. But if I were a betting man, I would bet on Tobias Myers starting this one because Tobias was recalled as part of the series of roster moves with Gasser ending up on the IL, which means he was able to come up sooner than the minimum 10 days that you're supposed to spend down in the minor league after an optional assignment. And that means that he didn't get a chance to pitch in Nashville yet. So his last start was game 1 of that White Sox series. So it's been like a full week for him since he last pitched. So you already have him on a couple extra days rest. If you start him on Friday, then you get to bump Peralta and everybody else back an extra day as well. So that puts you in a spot where everybody is starting an extra rest this time through. So I would guess that that's the way the Brewers are going to approach it. And if that is how they do it, it would be Tobias Myers in game 1, Freddie Peralta in game 2, and then Bryce Wilson getting the ball in game 3. So we'll see how that unfolds. Spencer, do you have any differing predictions? Or I know we were kind of talking about this backstage a little bit, but yeah.
Yeah,
no differing predictions.
No, but I would say that I would agree with them going that route if they do that. I think it would be good to get everyone a little bit more rest with the amount of, just pressure and stress the starting rotation has felt.
Given the state of that starting staff right now, you have an opportunity to give some guys a breather, and this would be a chance to do it. So I would expect them to take advantage of it, but maybe they won't do that, and you'll learn differently by the time you're listening. But we will be back with you at the same time next week to recap the action in that Tigers series and the Brewers' first series after they return home after that trip to Detroit. In the meantime, thank you all for listening. As a reminder, you can follow each of us on our respective Twitter pages. You can find me at @ByJackStern. You can find Spencer at SMichaelis234. And you can follow the pod at BF_pod on Twitter. You can send all your questions in every week to the podcast account. You have to tag the podcast account. People have gotten better at doing that. So good job, everybody. You can also email podcast at Brewer Fanatic to send in your inquiries as well. Until then, thank you all for listening, and we will talk to you at the same time next week. Go Brewers.